What is the most effed up thing a person you know has done?
Friend was in her final year of uni. Had strong grades, and a really great internship lined up with a place she dreamed about working at that almost certainly would have led to a great job. Her parents faked her younger brother's death on the day where she had 3 finals back to back to back. They wanted to test whether she cared more about her family or her career, supposedly. She raced home in panic and grief, getting plane tickets and flying across the country, trying to get deferred exams on short notice. One of her profs, who helmed 2 of those classes, required a death certificate, which she couldn't get, since her brother was alive and well. She didn't get to graduate because of that, at least not in that semester, and she lost her dream internship. Thankfully, she got a good job after graduating half a year later, not nearly as good as the one she lost out on, and she's largely cut her parents out of her life. My uncle left my aunt for their son's wife. Edit, not long after, their son, my cousin, married another woman with the same name, and visits his dad and ex.
Of all the stories, this was the shortest one with the biggest WTF?
I was getting out of the army and had put back over $70,000 for a home for my family. My mother got my banking information and took every penny for DG. When I tried suing, my family disowned me.
When I was a drill sergeant, I'd see lots of young people with a parent on their bank account. I'd advise them to remove anyone other than a spouse, because I'd seen parents take their young soldiers' money many times. Edit. Good morning, you are right, a spouse can take their money too. This happens all the time, and it's a sad reality, though not as sad as a mom taking all of her 20-year son's money while he's trying to get through basic training and she's trying to enjoy Oxy. And, the military expects soldiers to give their spouse access to money, and in basic training you don't have frequent use of the internet to move money between separate accounts. My soldiers had their cell phone on one Sunday a month for 10 minutes.
Kid I, 25M, used to be friends with in high school, let's call him Jake, got into benzodiazepines around junior year. He had stolen some Xanax from a D dealer, and the dealer showed up at his house to take the DG back. Jake, barred out of his mind and scared of getting killed, beat up by the D dealer, swung an axe at the D dealer, sticking it directly into his skull. D dealer lived, and even took a selfie, which got passed around school, of him with blood all over his face and the axe stuck in his skull. Both ended up going to UV, I believe.
Xanax.
I finally have an answer for Ask Reddit. I work for a gardening company and we have guys come and go on the regular. One guy we'll call Mike because that's his name, worked for us for a while and built up a relationship with one of the customers, Wilfred, name changed to protect the innocent. Anyway, Wilfred was around 90 years old and a veteran of World War II. He was also completely blind. He had this old BMW sitting in his cluttered garage. The thing looked like it hadn't moved in a couple of decades. The car was his pride and joy in his younger days, and he would tell anyone who would listen about how he used to drive himself and his wife to the local town to go dancing. Anyway, Mike told Wilfred he would take the car home and fix it up and bring it back when it was all sorted. It was decided if he could get the old girl purring again, Wilfred would pay Mike a pretty penny. What Mike actually did was drive it straight to a scrap yard, sell it for scrap value, then lie through his teeth every time Wilfred asked about it. No, he wasn't fired. So yeah, I think that's the most disgusting thing I have seen anyone do. Steal from a blind old man.
I was friends with a girl who was obsessed with babies. You know how some girls really like horses? She was like that with babies. Not kids, just babies and toddlers. She was only friends with me because I babysat a lot. I found out later she would take used diapers out of the ladies' bathroom.
So, I used to work for this company back before smartphones were a big thing. People would text or call in questions and guides, would look up answers for them online, or even sometimes call a business to ask the question for them and text back their answer. We'd get requests for phone numbers, addresses, operating hours, stuff like that. Sometimes, they'd ask ridiculous questions and things obviously meant to shock guides. But this one guy, he would call in and ask when specific daycares in and around a specific city took out their trash. And he wanted to know if they threw diapers out separate from the other trash. I don't remember how it all came out, but it turns out this guy was going through daycare dumpsters and making what he called squish dolls. As in, he stuffed used diapers into baby clothes and, I don't know, cuddled with them or some weird poo. He even had an online blog with pictures of his creations and would describe how they felt and smelled. It was so effed up.
I'm not surprised. We had some creeps at our daycare going through our trash for a bit.
I don't know him anymore, but I knew someone who beat someone unconscious, then smashed them with a concrete bird bath and hid him under a trailer. The person was not dead and ended up waking up. The offender went to prison for 5 years.
He went to his wife's work New Year's party and got really drunk. He suddenly decided his wife was having an affair with her boss. A loud shouting match ensued and he suddenly pulled out a gun. He shot his wife, her boss, and himself in the head. He and her boss were DOA. His wife lost her vision but survived. They had 3 small children.
My chiropractor was shot and killed by his secretary's ex-husband because he thought they were having an affair. He came to the clinic at 12 noon, shot my chiropractor and then himself in front of her. I had an APPT. For noon that day that I changed to 4 p.m. I probably wouldn't have been shot because the guy didn't kill any of the people in the office other than himself and the victim, but I'm glad I didn't see it.
The brother of a girl I dated years ago almost hacked his ex-girlfriend to death with a machete and then tried to kill himself by overdosing. They both survived and I believe he's still in prison.
I guess it's a good thing he's a complete failure.
I found out a teenage girl at my church and her 2 sisters were being molested by their stepdad. I called the police and reached out to the girl's parents who always brought her to church. They already knew and hadn't said anything. Eventually I found out a dozen people, including their mother, knew but they all preferred it to be handled by the church. Edit. The stepdad was a Christian pastor. Also, it's scary how many people have commented about having similar experiences.
What exactly did they think the church was going to do about this? Pray, that's so effed up and I'm glad you stepped up to call the cops on him.
A female friend of mine murdered her mother. Shot her to death in the shower.
While at work, a former co-worker of mine was hog-tied and carried off by U.S. Marshals for CP, sexual assault of a minor. None of us had any suspicions about it and we worked with him every day. Yeesh.
My friend's dad stabbed his wife in a heated argument and blew up their house while dad was still inside. Heard the explosion from my own bedroom. Luckily my friend and his sister were elsewhere. The local newspaper articles were hauntingly graphic about it.
I'm pretty sure my uncle brutally murdered his first wife. It remains a cold case, but there's a heap of suspicious circumstances and evidence that points to his guilt. Someone even wrote a book about it. He was the last one to see her alive, and the first to find her, only half an hour later. She'd been stabbed repeatedly in the face.
In the late 1990s, a guy in my fantasy football league was arrested for molesting his kids. He made his wife participate as well as the family pet. Real sick stuff. Creeped the rest of us out when we found out.
I worked closely with a surgeon for 10 years. He was talented, but very difficult to be around. A year after I left the hospital, I heard he had been arrested for molestation, child pornography and sex trafficking, I believe. Thankfully he killed himself in jail. Edit. First, I am sad that my highest rated comment is about a monster. Second, for those who have asked and or are wondering, this happened in Santa Cruz. Back in the day this kid I knew was on Xanax and stole one of his neighbor's SUVs. We lived in the type of neighborhood people just left their keys in their car, truck. Yes, I knew a lot of people who did this in the South. I was walking back to my other buddy's house from his house and was pretty fed up myself, so when he drove up next to me in an SUV offering to drive me the rest of the way I didn't think much of it. His parents and sisters had multiple cars so I just assumed it was one of theirs. After I got in I obviously asked whose car it was and found out the truth. I was like WTF man and tried not to touch anything and I got out at my destination and that was that. About 30 minutes later me and other friend hear fire trucks and police blaring down the road. We start calling our friend and his mom. No one knows where he is at. The next day we finally get in touch with him. He hid and slept out in the woods because after he dropped me off he went off-roading in the SUV and ultimately left it on some train tracks. A train came and hit the SUV causing fire and mayhem. Can't imagine what those neighbors had to say to the insurance.
What in the GTA 5 is that?
My cousin was killed because a guy decided he'd kill himself by flooring it into another car on a major road. My cousin died, and his girlfriend had to undergo multiple extensive surgeries. The guy survived with minor injuries. Edit. I tried telling myself what you all are, that they weren't thinking rationally. I've been suicidal myself since I was young, so I get that. But they told Ems their intent until they found out someone else died, and then they suddenly stopped talking. They then milked the living hell out of that narrative and how unstable they were throughout the trial and how he didn't mean to do it. You can decide you're done with your own life, even if it's a sad and tragic conclusion. But you don't get to decide someone else is done with theirs.
What the actual F? Why not just drive off a cliff?
I have tons of stories from people I met in rehab. Woman I know was end-of-life caretaker for her aunt who had terminal cancer. She was also a D addict. She stole her aunt's meds and lied, telling people she didn't want visitors or need to be moved to hospice. Her aunt died in severe pain and alone so this woman could get high. Guy RPD and beat a woman. She called the cops. Somehow his lawyer managed to get him into rehab instead of jail pending trial. Had something going to do with him being a veteran. Woman killed herself so she never showed up to the pre-trial. All charges were dropped. He came back from the pre-trial praising God for giving him another chance at life and he'd learned his lesson not to leave marks for next time. Some of the other guys congratulated him and they would regularly discuss how to do it and get away with it. Effing disgusting.
I know a dude who pooed down a chimney. Impressive as it was effed up.
He was probably blowing smoke up his ass.
Guy the first went to high school with beat his GF to death and spent less than 6 months in jail.
How can you spend less than 6 months in jail for killing someone?
I know a guy who was tutoring a girl from high school. He had some serious problems in his university, got expelled, and was pretty depressed. At some point, he RPD'd the girl, killed her and committed suicide, even though he seemed like a more or less normal person.
A guy the first worked with, 21M, was just a year or two younger than me at the time. He struggled with a lot with depression and had a super dark sense of humor but really funny most of the time. Would crack jokes all the time about killing himself but wore a good enough of a smile and with us not knowing anything at the time that no one thought it was material, just a little cringy. He found his only reason to live in the girl that he was dating at the time. She was trying to leave him because her parents didn't like him. He was sitting in his car crying and begging her to not leave him, and when he realized it was over he called her parents to add them to the call, only the mum joined. He blamed them for his declining mental state and his last words were something along the line of, "I hope this scars you all forever," before shooting himself in the head with them both on the phone. His family was wealthy but ultimately not present in his life. His parents cut him a check and would vanish for weeks at a time. He was really alone, but we only found out after. His family was ashamed of his actions and didn't write an obituary. There was no funeral. It's so odd to see someone you saw every day just vanish.
He slept with his son's long-term girlfriend. Like his son's first love. Told his son like it was no big deal. He told us about it at work, and said his son was being a bit of a bitch about it. We then watched his life fall apart as both his kids cut him out of their lives. Dude found out he became a grandpa from his older daughter via an email with no pictures. As you can imagine, sleeping with his son's GF was the worst thing I'm aware of that he's done, but he was a horrible person generally speaking.
I bet he was shocked when his family started treating him like the piece of poo that he is. I'm glad that his family excommunicated him.
One day out of the blue I was thinking about an old childhood friend I hadn't seen in well over a decade, closer to 2 probably. Thought it would be fun to Google their name and see what they were up to. They were in prison for raping a minor under the age of 14. Immediately felt sick to my stomach, was in complete shock. Took a couple days to shake off. So many fun memories from my childhood now ruined cause I can't help thinking about his crime. Never Googling any old friends again. It f'd me up real good for a bit.
I know someone who was doing a semester abroad in China during college. She let her boyfriend at the time fly out from the US for a week-plus visit, knowing she was going to dump him the second she saw him. She did it because it would have been too hard to dump him over the phone. Edit to add more details as I'm remembering this, the guy did not speak Chinese, and he didn't have enough money to change his flight, so he just kinda bumbled around China for a week being miserable.
OMG. Once I had a girlfriend come visit me for a 4-day visit at my grandmother's house when it was full of family. It was during the summer when we were both in college. We go for a walk right after she arrives and she breaks up with me. I'm thinking, wait, what? What am I supposed to do with this person for 4 days around my family? I went on a full court press to change her mind or at least get an explanation. It was out of the blue. Eventually it came out that on the way to the house she had sat next to a woman on a train and had a conversation with her that caused her to conclude she should break up with me. She never articulated any concrete reason why, though. It was like she told the woman she had some doubts, Who doesn't? And the woman said, trust your feelings, and that was that. She did change her mind. We had a great weekend, and we dated for another 6 months or so. Eventually, she broke up with me again, and this time I was like, yeah, fine. I think she was trying to get me to change her mind again. She acted a little obsessed with me for a few months after I accepted it so quickly. I was done, though.
Started a gay nightclub that was successful, so he decided to sell shares in his business to investors to expand. But nightclubs are a trendy business, and shortly thereafter the business started to fail. So when several of the investors began to demand their money, he murdered 3 of them. He's currently a guest of the state of NY for the rest of his life. Further info, this was back in the 90s and the club was actually pretty nice, visited it several times when I was in the city on business. I had no idea about the murders until the FBI called to let me know I should call them immediately if he got in touch. Edit. Well, this lurid tale has proven popular, so here's a few more tidbits. I did have a link to an NYT story on this, but it's now behind their paywall. Which is okay because my sister is mentioned as one of the witnesses. She had invested a few thousand in his business, being the smart one in the family. She had made a few bucks in life but had been wise enough to write it off when it failed. But she testified that he approached friends for his scheme. We had grown up on the same block in suburbia and she had always thought he was a smart guy. And indeed all of his victims, living or dead, had been friends. As for how the FBI found me, it was pretty easy. My name and her name were in his address book. Did it ever become a movie? Well, not that I know of, but it was an episode on at least 2 of those true crime TV shows. Which was strange because the 2 I watched made no mention of the gay nightclub or the sex toy shop which was part of the business. They just covered it as a fraud case that ended in murder. My dad ran a small but successful business for over a decade, but when my eldest brother started working with him he ruined us to the point that he almost made us homeless. After he left us high and dry, my dad had spent 3 to 4 years trying to do damage control but ultimately had to sell the business for less than half its worth. To this day my eldest brother has never apologized nor has taken any responsibility for his actions. I have zero respect for that scumbag.
My aunt and uncle are rather wealthy farmers. They have spent the last several decades building up new divisions of the business for their kids to run and eventually inherit. One of the big expansions was going from simply raising beef cattle to handling the butchering and selling the meat themselves. Anyway, for the butcher shop they built a beautiful $1 million shop and sent my cousin's husband to butcher school to get all his licensing to be the operations manager while my cousin would be bookkeeper. They never did a thing to earn it and were essentially handed a golden ticket. It's a little complicated what happened next, but after a few years my uncle started getting negative feedback about how the place is run. When they spoke to my cousin's husband they offered him more money thinking it was a motivation issue. They were already overpaid and could afford their own $1 million home. The husband made a snarky retort that he already makes that much. That raised red flags. They ended up looking at the accounts and things seemed fishy. They went to the business after hours and took the bookkeeping files. The husband found out and drove to their house to essentially scream at them in rage. In the end it turns out they had embezzled over $1 million by cooking the books. They got kicked out of the family business, with no legal repercussions and a fat buyout bonus, and generally have little to do with any of the family. My aunt and uncle have made attempts at reconciliation because they want to see their grandchildren, but have been thus far rejected. It's insane because they were handed everything and it still wasn't good enough. They were going to inherit the business and they blew it.
At least the embezzlement was discovered before he inherited the business, because he would have flushed that before too long afterwards.
My father molested my sibling.
My best friend at the time had depression and drinking issues. One night he got really drunk and I think DG were in the mix and he stole a gun out of his neighbor's barn and shot one of his toes off on purpose. He's doing better now, thankfully.
My ex-best friend slept with a coworker that was freshly married and had a newborn. In the wife's car. Twice.
Did they work in a restaurant together? This sounds like restaurant backroom drama.
A previous work colleague. got back together with his girlfriend after they had been on a break. He later found out she was pregnant with the other guy's baby. So he paid 2 guys to hijack them, drive them to a secluded location, shoot her through the stomach to kill the baby, and shoot him in the shoulder to make it look like a genuine hijacking. He was caught because he didn't pay the 2 guys and they ratted him out. He is now sitting in a South African jail. Edit 1. All 3 ended up in jail, not just my work colleague. He paid half up front and didn't pay the second half after the job was complete. Edit 5. Links and identifiable information removed. My comment was removed. I had added identifiable information. This has been fixed and the comment is visible again.
My bipolar alcoholic brother has a history of beating and choking his girlfriends. He moved in with my elderly father after my mum died and refused to leave, and my dad refused to make him leave or press charges against the domestic abuse because it was his son. My dad couldn't find peace in his own home and I was powerless to stop it. On different occasions my brother broke my dad's finger, almost broke his leg, and threw a knife and hit him handle first in the head and knocked a gash in his head. If it had been blade first he likely would have died. Still no charges. Luckily the arrests and other trouble piled up until he spent time in jail and rehab and got his own place, and I've moved my father closer to me now so I can protect him better and he can have a safe place to live. My brother is already talking about moving to my dad's old house for free since nobody is living there, since everybody basically had to move away to be safe from him. He's a total degenerate piece of poo. There's a lot to pick from, but one of my ex-co-workers euthanized her 2 cats because she was getting a new couch and didn't want them to ruin it. She told us this at work and didn't get why she got a bunch of blank stares back.
What kind of vet would do this? I worked at a vet clinic for a few years. We had one person come in wanting to put their dog down because they were moving. We got them to relinquish their dog and one of the techs adopted him. I'm hoping if she was this heartless that she just dropped off her cats rather than staying with them as they were put down and someone on staff took them home and they're having a great life. I'm gonna choose to believe that.
There was a decomposing dead cat stuck between a fence and a wall next to the gym in my school. If physical education was our first lesson, we had to wait in front of the gym until someone fetched the keys. My friend Jason went to fetch the keys and left his bag. This fat class bully Toby used 2 sticks to pick up the dead cat, opened Jason's bag, and put the cat in. Jason hasn't noticed anything until we were in the locker room. He opened the bag, saw the dead cat, dropped the bag, cat fell apart, soup of rotten cat insides crawling with maggots splashed to the floor. Class was cancelled. Cleaning company had to disinfect the locker room.
WTF? You guys didn't tell him when he came back?
My dad used to throw our cats at trees as hard as he could and laugh as we cried as the cat would limp away and never come home.
My 6-month-old nephew, at the time, he's 11 now and healthy and obsessed with Fortnite like any proper 11-yo, had a SIDS episode. He stopped breathing and the only reason he's alive is because my mom obsessively checked on him while she was babysitting. She and my brother managed to bring him around and then they went to the hospital. My mom was understandably freaked out by this, finding her first grandchild turning blue and all. So she called her sister for emotional support and her sister told her, verbatim, "Well, you just need to get Satan out of your life." Up to that point I'd told my mom for years that her family were emotionally and mentally abusive narcissists. That is what it took for her to finally believe me and cut them out. Now, after my mom's death, those same assholes have the nerve to act like they have no idea why mom stopped talking to them.
They have no idea why mom stopped talking to them. They should get Satan out of their lives. Jesus. Some of these are, oof. I'm sitting here thinking, well, that high school teacher that had sex with a student while her mom was also a teacher at that same school, was a good story. Clearly not.
Well, a few days ago the father of one of my volleyball players I coached murdered her mother's boyfriend. So I'm gonna have to go with that.
A girl who I used to call my best friend told me her stepdad molested her, so I moved her into my house. I got her enrolled in college. She lived with me for 4 months before her mum said they bought a dog and she could move back, with the stepdad. She did. Obviously this was annoying, but I stood by her and stayed friends. Then one day I was going through old chats with a different friend for fun and found out that the ex-best friend used my email to set up a Facebook, resulting in me accidentally logging in. I found nudes of myself that she took of me while asleep, 15 years old at the time, sent to random men who she had no previous chat history with, but worst of all, I saw she had sent photos of my nephew and brother to a dude and told her that my brother RPD her and that's her son. She gave out our address because the guy threatened to kill him. She also told him their names and ages. I was fuming. I let her do so much poo to me, but now she went for my brother who had recently tried to take his life. I have never been so upset. I confronted her on the phone and she had no words except "I'm sorry." I erased her from my life, didn't tell my brother, and deleted any existence she had in my home or phone, etc.
I just know someone who stole a shirt. What the hell is going on in y'all's lives?
Aha, yay, legit. I was like him when my best friend was 13. She stole a slime with googly eyes in a toy store.
A close friend of my mother's, we'll call her Maureen, was having an affair with a person who was also married. We'll call him Patrick. Patrick's wife, who we'll call Caroline, was quite mentally unstable, suffering badly from depression because Patrick was quite abusive and was always cheating on her. Despite him being a serial cheater, Maureen was sure that it was true love, and was completely committed to the idea of the two of them eventually divorcing their respective spouses and moving in together. Patrick was obviously dragging his heels with this, but the relationship lasted because both Patrick and Maureen were nasty people who delighted in tormenting Caroline. Patrick would constantly gaslight her, and Maureen would hint and always hang around but make it just deniable enough that nothing could be proven. With Caroline's history of mental illness, nobody believed her, figuring that she was still paranoid and accusing Patrick because he had cheated before. Patrick had convinced everyone he had changed, of course, and all of this combined to make Caroline look absolutely psychotic. Patrick and Maureen continued this behavior for over a year, absolutely tormenting this poor woman. One evening, my mother gets a phone call from Maureen, who seems to be in a state of shock. She asks my ma'am to come over, because she just got the news that Caroline has killed herself. My ma'am rushes over, expecting Maureen to be in a state of absolute guilt and regret, but when she gets there, Maureen is laughing about it, and says Patrick is coming over soon. My ma'am, who was not a very nice person herself, after all, she damn well knew about this and said nothing, was finally disgusted enough that she ripped into Maureen and left. Over the next couple of days, the story comes out, Caroline had hanged herself in her garage, and her teenage daughter had found her. Even more tragically, Caroline had timed it to ensure that neither of her children would find her. Completely unexpectedly, the daughter had returned home early and gone looking for her. In the following months, Maureen broke up with her husband and filed for divorce. She and Patrick purchased an atrocious new-build suburban house together, and Patrick convinced Maureen to put the whole thing in her name. They lasted a few more months, and then Patrick started ghosting her, cheated on her, and left. Maureen's husband and teenage sons had cut contact with her. At first, the sons still maintained contact, but when it became clear that Patrick disliked the younger son and was turning Maureen against him, both brothers left to go live with their dad. Maureen was left with hundreds of thousands worth of debt, as the house was in her name. On the one hand, yeah, she got played by somebody who I'm pretty sure is a legitimate sociopath. On the other hand, she still played with a woman's life and celebrated her being out of the way when she killed herself as a direct result of this behavior, so I have absolutely zero sympathy for her. I think Patrick brought out her true colors, because normal people do not effing do that.
Greater than Maureen was left with hundreds of thousands worth of debt, as the house was in her name. Good. I hope everyone is laughing at her life like she laughed at that woman's death. Greater than Patrick brought out her true colors, because normal people do not effing do that. Time tells all truths about all people. I urge people to always remember this as they go through living.
My friend went to party out of the country with his GF, his male friend and his female friend. They were at the club and his female friend, who is his GF's best friend, told him that she has never kissed anyone and that she wants her first kiss to be special. He grabbed her head and started French kissing her while she tried to make him stop. His GF was laughing about it. Afterwards, he recorded her crying about it in a taxi while mocking her, and he posted that vid to his close friends on Instagram.
My ex broke into my apartment and attacked me because he couldn't accept the fact I dumped him. I hope he's enjoying his time in prison. I pressed charges.
I worked with a woman in New Ross. Ireland, who said she regularly stopped her daughter from going to teenage discos just as she was about to leave, just to show her she was in charge. So effing nasty. Psychological abuse to her own child. Utter sea of a human.
Thank you for watching. We upload new videos every day, so be sure to come back for more fun. Please consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed the video.